For thousands of years, one river decided who survived in North Africa and who didn't. The Nile carved a single green strip through thousands of kilometers of unbroken desert, and 95% of Egypt's population still lives along that strip today. Nearly half of everyone living in North Africa is squeezed onto land created entirely by one river system. That river is no longer reliable. In 2025, a dam opened upstream in Ethiopia that Egypt's own president has called an existential threat. Egypt's population has doubled since 1990. The country that once fed much of the ancient world is now the largest wheat importer on Earth. And in response, Egypt has launched a plan to build something that sounds almost impossible: a second Nile Delta in the middle of the Sahara, using water that doesn't come from the Nile at all. Satellite images show it might be working. Hundreds of green circles blooming out of bare sand. But look closer, and the water keeping those fields alive is already running out, and this isn't even the first time Egypt has tried something like this. If you think a country's future can hinge entirely on one river, subscribe and stay here, because what's happening in Egypt right now is exactly that, playing out in real time. Before 1970, the Nile flooded every single year, fed by rainfall in the Ethiopian highlands. That annual flood carried nutrient-rich silt downstream and renewed Egyptian farmland with fresh fertility, a cycle that had run continuously since before recorded history, and is the reason Egypt became one of the earliest great civilizations on Earth. The Aswan High Dam, completed in 1970, ended that cycle. The dam delivered enormous benefits: consistent irrigation control and substantial hydroelectric power. But it also trapped the sediment that used to flow downstream behind the dam wall. Permanently, Egyptian farmland stopped receiving free natural fertilizer. Today, the country uses approximately 1 million tons of artificial fertilizer annually to compensate an expensive substitute for a process that used to happen automatically every flood season. That was the first blow to the system. The second one arrived much more recently, and Egypt has no control over it at all. In 2025, Ethiopia completed the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, now the largest dam on the African continent. It generates 5.15 gigawatts of electricity for Ethiopia, more than 2.5 times the output of the Hoover Dam, and represents a genuine source of national pride for a country that has dealt with chronic power shortages for decades. For Egypt, which draws 97% of its total water supply from the Nile, the dam represents something very different. Projections indicate Egypt will lose approximately 3 billion cubic meters of water per year, roughly 5% of its current total supply by 2055. Over the following century, some estimates suggest up to 85% of Egypt's Nile-dependent water access could ultimately be affected. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has publicly described GERD as an existential threat to the country. There has been no military or diplomatic resolution that meaningfully changes the dam's operation. Ethiopia controls the flow, Egypt downstream absorbs the consequences, and the population needing that water has been growing faster than at almost any point in Egyptian history. Egypt's population rose from approximately 60 million in 1990 to 120 million today, doubling in roughly 3 decades. Nearly all of those people need to live somewhere. And in a country where 96% of the land is desert, somewhere almost always means the same narrow, fertile strip along the Nile that has supported Egyptian life for millennia. This creates 3 simultaneous pressures converging on the same strip of land. Water availability is declining because of GERD. Farmland is being lost to urban expansion as the growing population needs housing. And the number of people needing to be fed keeps rising every year regardless of either of those other 2 trends. The result, Egypt now imports between 12 and 13 million tons of wheat annually, making it the largest wheat importer in the world, a dramatic reversal for a country once known as a breadbasket of the ancient world. The fragility of that dependency became brutally visible in February 2022, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. 82% of Egypt's imported wheat came from Russia and Ukraine combined. Bread prices spiked almost immediately, and Egypt, a country where bread subsidies are politically and socially central, faced a genuine crisis with no quick fix available. The historical solution to feeding Egypt had always been the same: more Nile Delta. So in 2018, the government proposed building one. President Sisi announced the New Delta project in 2018, a plan to convert 9,200 square kilometers of barren desert, an area roughly the size of Hawaii, into productive farmland. If fully realized, it would increase Egypt's total cultivated land by more than a third. There were two immediate engineering obstacles: how to get water into a region that historically has none, and how to keep that water from evaporating the moment it arrived under direct desert sun. The water transport system relies on two canal networks working together. The larger is the Al-Hammam system, a 170-kilometer channel that diverts treated agricultural wastewater, water that would otherwise simply flow into the Mediterranean and be lost, redirecting it south into the desert instead. A second, smaller 42-kilometer channel draws directly from the Nile and serves approximately 600,000 acres of the project area. But moving the water is only part of the challenge. The water collected by the Al-Hammam system starts at sea level. The desert plateau it needs to reach sits roughly 100 meters higher. 13 pumping stations positioned along the canal route physically push the water uphill against gravity for the entire journey. Then there's evaporation. Open canals are efficient and relatively cheap to build, but in extreme desert heat, evaporation losses can be severe. Fully enclosed tunnels solve that problem but cost dramatically more to construct at the scale this project requires. Egypt's engineers chose a hybrid. Most of the Al-Hammam route runs through open, concrete-lined canal, but the sections most exposed to evaporation and ground seepage run instead through 10 underground pipes, each 3 meters wide, carrying water beneath the surface for 22 kilometers before it re-emerges. Before any of this water reaches a single field, it passes through the New Delta Irrigation Water Treatment Plant, a facility spanning more than 320,000 square meters, with a processing capacity of 7.5 million cubic meters of treated water per day. It is, by current measure, the largest water treatment facility on Earth. The engineering ambition here is not in question. Whether it actually works long-term is a different matter, and Egypt has been down this exact road before. If this story is hitting different right now, share it with someone who needs to understand how fragile food security really is. Because what comes next is the part the satellite images don't show you. The New Delta is not Egypt's first attempt to force agriculture into the Sahara, and the history of those previous attempts is not encouraging. In the late 1990s, Egypt launched the Toshka project, a plan to divert Nile water through a network of canals into the western desert to create new farmland in a region called the New Valley. It was called the Project of the Century at launch. Billions of dollars were spent. Decades passed. Today, the Toshka canals carry only a fraction of their originally planned capacity. The agricultural transformation that was promised never materialized at anywhere near the scale envisioned. Separately, Egypt has spent years building entirely new cities, the new administrative capital, New Cairo, 10th of Ramadan City, 6th of October City, all framed as part of the same broad strategy: move population off the fertile Nile Valley land and into the desert. In practice, these developments have skewed heavily toward luxury housing and investment-grade real estate, rather than affordable housing at the density needed to genuinely relieve pressure on the Nile Valley. The pattern across both efforts is consistent: extraordinary engineering scale, genuinely impressive construction achievements, but a track record of falling well short of the transformational outcomes originally promised. So where does that leave the New Delta? The satellite evidence for the New Delta is, on its face, genuinely impressive. Hundreds of new fields have appeared, irrigated by radial sprinkler systems rotating across circular plots up to a kilometer in diameter, the green circles visible from orbit. As of 2024, more than 3,300 square kilometers have been reclaimed. That part is real. But the source of the water irrigating much of that reclaimed land is not what the project's public narrative emphasizes. Much of the water currently used on the new desert farms is not coming from the massive treatment plant or the canal network at all. It's coming from non-renewable groundwater reserves beneath the western desert. Research based on satellite imagery has found that the rate of groundwater depletion in this region has doubled over the past 12 years. This is fossil water, accumulated in underground aquifers over thousands of years, with effectively no natural replenishment on any human timescale. Once it's drawn down, it does not come back. There is also a question of what's actually being grown. Much of the new delta farming is focused on cash crops for export tomatoes, fruit, and nuts rather than the wheat Egypt desperately needs to reduce its massive import bill. The government's justification is that higher value export crops generate the foreign currency needed to pay for imported food, including the wheat the country still can't grow enough of domestically. The core idea behind the new Delta recycling treated agricultural wastewater, rather than drawing more directly from an already strained Nile, is genuinely smart engineering logic. In a country facing a shrinking water supply from GERD, a rapidly growing population, and almost no spare arable land, that kind of efficiency isn't optional. It's necessary. But the margin for error is thin, and the current reliance on non-renewable groundwater to fill the gap between what the treatment system delivers and what the new farmland actually needs is not a long-term solution. It's a temporary patch on a project still under construction. Egyptian civilization has managed the Nile more successfully, and for longer than almost any other society has managed a major river system. That historical competence doesn't guarantee this particular gamble succeeds. The engineering achievements here are real. The treatment plant is genuinely the largest of its kind in the world. The canal and pumping infrastructure pushing water 100 meters uphill across desert terrain is a legitimate feat. Whether the new delta becomes the beginning of a genuine agricultural transformation or simply the latest entry in a long Egyptian history of ambitious desert projects that delivered impressive engineering without delivering the promised outcome, that answer is still being written. One depleting aquifer and one green circle at a time. Egypt has bet its agricultural future on water it is partly manufacturing and partly borrowing from a reserve that won't refill. The next decade will determine which of those two sources the country can actually depend on.